My name is Ava Hart. When I was 13 years old, during a family road trip, I accidentally spilled orange juice into my golden little sister's backpack, Olivia. She cried. My mother screamed, "You always ruin everything." And then, at a desolate gas station in Montana, my father said, "If you want to be so independent, find your own way home." They drove off. They didn't come back. I slept behind a dumpster that night, still holding an unpaid candy bar. From that day forward, I was no longer part of their family. No calls, no questions. I disappeared. 17 years later, a pristine white envelope arrived at my house. It was Olivia's wedding invitation. Beneath the names of the bride and groom was a handwritten note from my parents. "We hope you'll come, it would mean a lot to the family." Disgusting, but I'll go, just not to celebrate them. Have you ever received a message, a letter, or an invitation that brought your entire past flooding back in a single second? Something you thought you had moved on from, only to realize it never really left, it was just waiting to be named. And if you have, where are you watching this video from? Tell me before I tell you what really happened that night when I was 13. I remember that trip clearly. It began like every forced family getaway, awkward silences, 80-second radio music, and an atmosphere so tense it felt like it might snap. We were headed to Leavenworth, a small Bavarian-style town in Washington, where my mom said it would be good for Olivia's mindset before she started her elite arts program in Seattle. Everything was always about Olivia. She was the perfect sketch they spent their whole lives coloring in. And me, the older sister by 2 years, was just a shadow trailing behind, constantly reminded to not ruin the vibe every time I tried to speak. On the second day of the trip, we pulled into a small roadside gas station along the highway. The afternoon sun came slanting through the window, baking the back seat where Olivia and I were sitting. I pulled an orange juice bottle from the cooler, twisted the cap carelessly, and the liquid sprayed straight onto her brand new cream leather backpack, the one my mom spent nearly a week choosing for her first day at the academy. I scrambled to wipe it with napkins, muttering, "I'm sorry," over and over, but Olivia burst into tears like her entire artistic future had just been destroyed. "You ruin everything," my mom yelled from the front. "You always destroy everything. There's never a peaceful day with you." My dad said nothing. He just gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw clenched. We got back on the road, and he didn't turn the music back on. Only the hum of the AC and Olivia's sniffling beside me filled the silence. 15 minutes later, he suddenly veered into a remote rest stop with nothing but an old convenience store and 2 gas pumps. I thought he needed fuel or a break. But once the car stopped, he turned around and looked at me with an icy stare I had never seen before. "If you want to act so independent," he said, "then find your own way home." I forced a smile. "What did you say, Dad?" My mother didn't turn around. She just stared straight through the windshield. Olivia stayed silent. No one said another word. Then the car door opened, and he stepped out, popped the trunk. For a few seconds, I didn't understand what was happening. Then I saw my backpack being pulled out and dropped on the ground at my feet. "Get out," he said, not looking at me. "We're leaving first. Maybe next time you'll learn how to behave." I still thought it was just a punishment. A scare tactic. I stepped out of the car, stood by the gas pump, grabbed the strap of my backpack, and waited, watching as the door slammed shut. I stood there, expecting to hear, "Get back in the car, sweetheart," but it never came. The engine roared. The silver SUV rolled forward. I caught a glimpse of Olivia tilting her head to look at me through the window, expressionless. No signal, no goodbye, then everything disappeared into a red cloud of dust behind the road. I stood still for a few minutes, hoping it was just some twisted joke and they'd turn around. Then 10 minutes. Then 30. Nothing but the sound of passing cars and the wary glance of a man stepping out of the convenience store, cigarette in mouth, staring at me like I was a problem he didn't want to get involved with. I sat down on the scorching concrete, my back against the wall behind the gas station. The only spot not burning under the sun was behind a large green dumpster where the roof cast a narrow strip of shade. I pulled my backpack close and searched for my phone, but the battery had already died. In my pocket, I had $4 in loose change, a hair tie, and a candy bar I had grabbed from home but never eaten. That night, I slept behind the dumpster. Not exactly slept, I just rested my head on the backpack and waited for morning. Every sound made my heart leap into my throat. Trucks, stray cats, the wind rattling a loose sign. I didn't cry. Strangely, not a single tear fell. Maybe because I hadn't fully accepted it was real. Maybe because I was still waiting for them to come back. Like children do, still believing grown-ups always return. I remember counting time by the ticking in my head. 1, 2, 3. Each time headlights swept across the lot, I pulled my arms in tighter, hoping. But the light never stopped. No one came back. No one called my name. And slowly, I began to understand they really had left me here. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen this. When the sky finally began to lighten, I dragged myself out from behind the dumpster, legs numb like my body had frozen overnight. My stomach churned, my throat felt like sandpaper, and my mind held only one clear thought: I had to find my own way home. No more fantasies of them returning. No more pretending this was some harsh lesson that would end in a last-minute hug. The truth was as plain and sharp as the morning light hitting the cracked cement beneath my feet. They left me. And no one else was coming. I stepped inside the convenience store. The night shift guy was switching out with an older woman who had just arrived. She looked at me with a mix of hesitation and curiosity. I asked if I could use the phone. She pointed toward the payphone on the wall behind the shelves, without saying a word. I dug through my pocket and pulled out the last 2 lucky coins I had. My hands were trembling as I dialed. I didn't even know why I chose that number, maybe because she was the only person who had ever looked at me without judgment. Miss Bennett was my 7th grade English teacher. The one who gave me an A+ when the whole class laughed at the poem I wrote about loneliness. The only adult who had ever asked me, "Is everything okay at home?" I didn't answer her back then. But now, as her voice came through the line, gentle yet steady, I choked up for a few seconds. "Miss Bennett, it's me, Ava. I think I'm lost." It was a lie. A bold, deliberate lie. I wasn't lost, I'd been left behind. But when the word lost came out of my mouth, it felt easier than saying abandoned. Maybe because I wasn't yet brave enough to admit I'd been discarded by my own parents like a broken item. Miss Bennett didn't press. Her voice dropped slightly, paused for a brief beat, then simply asked, "Where are you?" An hour and a half later, her old Honda pulled into the gas station. I stood there waiting, not crying, just wearing the same expression I had behind the dumpster blank. She stepped out, gave me a short hug, then opened the door for me to get in. No scolding, no pressing for details. The whole drive back to town, she kept the radio on low just enough to cushion the silence without swallowing it. When the car stopped in front of my house, I tightened my grip on the backpack strap and was about to get out when she softly called, "Ava." I turned back. Her eyes held no trace of judgment, only a quiet, deep sadness. "If you ever need anything, anytime, I'm here." I nodded, but didn't say a word. I walked into the house, and the first thing I saw was Olivia spinning in front of the mirror, trying on a new olive green dress. Flowy skirt, square neckline, puffed princess sleeves, the kind of dress Mom would never buy for me, not even on my birthday. Mom sat on the couch, laptop on her lap, steam rising from a cup of coffee beside her. She didn't stand, she didn't rush over. She just glanced up at me and said, as if I'd just returned from a walk, "Oh, you're back?" I stood there, backpack still on my shoulder, shoes dirty, shirt wrinkled, hair a tangled mess, and I felt something with painful clarity. No one in this house believed I had been abandoned. No one thought anything was wrong. Not a single person asked, "Are you okay?" or "What happened?" My mom didn't ask where I had been. My dad wasn't even home. Olivia looked at me through the mirror, then turned back and kept picking shoes for her first day at the new academy. I came back, but no one welcomed me. No one apologized, and no one explained anything. From that day on, I was no longer a daughter in that family, just someone temporarily staying. I woke up early to make breakfast, did the laundry, took Olivia to school, followed every instruction my mother gave. But no one ever said thank you. I was assigned the role of the model older sister, but no one cared what I thought, what I wanted, or how I felt. Olivia continued to live like a princess in a crystal palace. Dresses, ballet, art classes, praised for every little step. I was the shadow trailing behind, cleaning her shoes, tossing her half-finished milk, learning how to exist without causing any more trouble. Years passed like that. Until one day, I looked into the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. Thin. Silent. Eyes always cast downward, as if waiting for permission to simply exist. I realized, if I stayed any longer, I would disappear not physically, but from within. I left home with nothing but a suitcase of clothes, an old laptop donated by the library for low-income students, and a few $100s I'd saved from working shifts at a bakery near school. No one saw me off. No one gave advice. My mother was still watching her morning show when I left. Olivia wasn't even home, probably at piano class or trying on dresses for the fall recital. I locked the doors softly, like a guest quietly moving out of a temporary shelter, careful not to make a sound. Honestly, even on that day, I still wasn't sure if I'd ever truly been a daughter in that house. Maybe I was just a temporary resident, unnecessary, invisible, and easily replaced. The first few years were deeply lonely. I rented a tiny basement room in an old house on the outskirts of Salem. Every morning, I walked 13 blocks to a cafe for the early shift. At lunch, I'd eat cold sandwiches behind the counter. At night, I studied online while washing dishes in the back of a Korean restaurant. I had no close friends, no family. But for the first time, I had silence, the kind that didn't come with criticism or comparisons. I enrolled in a community college IT program on a partial scholarship. The first lines of code I wrote looked meaningless, but I kept at it because it was the one thing I could control, the one thing no one could take from me. I started to fall in love with coding because it was fair. Type it right and it works. Type it wrong and it shows you the error. There was no "you should give in to your sister," or "she's tired, do it for her," here. Just logic, feedback, and results. 2 years later, I transferred to Oregon State University on a full scholarship. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't need to. Didn't want to. On the enrollment form, I marked "Do not contact family in case of emergency." I lived in the dorms, kept working part-time, and used my spare hours to learn freelance programming skills on YouTube and Stack Overflow. When my classmates went home on weekends or had their parents drop by with muffins and scented tissues, I stayed behind, put in my headphones, and wrote code like my entire world lived inside those lines. Graduating with honors at 24, I moved to Portland. A big, noisy city, but it gave me the comforting feeling of being anonymous. I rented a small studio apartment, white walls, wooden floors, a window that looked out over a row of red brick houses. For the first time in my life, I got to choose the color of my curtains. I could decide what art to hang on the wall, when to drink coffee, what kind of pet to bring home. I chose a gray tabby cat with round eyes. I named him Pixel. He was timid, always hiding under the bed at loud noises, just like I was in the early years of adulthood. But slowly, he began sleeping on my chest every night, purring softly like a silent form of comfort. I landed a job at a mid-sized software company and later transitioned into freelancing to have more control over my time. I started a small blog called Patchwork Soul, where I wrote about healing invisible scars and surviving inside a family that everyone calls normal but never felt safe. I didn't use the last name Hart on the blog. I went by Ava Lane. Not to hide, just because I wanted to try living a life where they didn't get to name me. The blog started to gain readers. Some people emailed to say their parents had forgotten them at school too. Others shared stories of being beaten by siblings and labeled the leftover. One person wrote, "This is the first time I've seen someone describe exactly what I've felt but couldn't put into words." I wasn't a therapist or a motivational figure. I was just a girl who had once been left behind. And now I write so that no one else has to feel like a mistake in their own life. 7 years after I left home, I had a stable income, a place of my own, a cat, and a blog read by tens of thousands each month. I even had a few friends, not many, but enough to know what it feels like to be heard. I still had zero contact from my mother, father, or Olivia. No phone calls, no messages. Not once had they visited my blog, left a comment, or sent an email realizing that Ava Lane was actually me. Maybe they knew and chose to ignore it. Maybe they never cared. Whatever the reason, I no longer felt hurt. Because now, I knew with absolute clarity. I didn't need them to exist. And I hadn't just survived. I had lived well. But then, 17 years later, just when I thought I had buried the name Ava Hart beneath the dust of time, that invitation showed up. And in one simple line, it would mean a lot to the family. I was dragged back to that night behind the dumpster, back to that 13-year-old girl standing still beneath the yellow lights of the gas station, waiting for something that would never come. 3 days after our company's quarterly review meeting, I received a pale ivory envelope tucked between a pile of junk mail and utility bills. No return address. The front simply listed my address spelled correctly, with the right zip code but no hint of familiarity. I nearly threw it away, as I always did. Until the sunlight from my window caught a shimmer of silver ink. You're invited. When I tore open the thick envelope, a faint perfume rose from it, strange, delicate, but calculated. And then, I saw my sister's name. Olivia Hart. Along with a short handwritten note in a script I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. We hope you'll come, it would mean a lot to the family. Love, Mom and Dad. I held the card in my hands, staring at the embossed lettering. Olivia Hart and Nathaniel Blake request the honor of your presence. Just below it was the venue, Silverleaf Estate, Napa Valley, California. An extravagant vineyard estate I'd once heard mentioned on a podcast about million-dollar weddings. I pictured rolling green vines stretching to the horizon, sunlight glittering in glasses of Prosecco, orchestral music echoing through rows of pristine white chairs. A world where everything is perfect if you can afford to erase what doesn't fit. Tucked into the corner of the invitation was a small slip of paper, handwritten in the same cursive I hadn't seen since I was a child. We know it's been distant, but family is forever. Love, Mom and Dad. And Frith. Soft words, written as if on a lazy afternoon, maybe while picking flowers or sampling wine. As if I'd never been left on the side of a highway. As if the years of silence were just a passing breeze we could overlook with a smile and a toast. I placed the invitation on the table, stunned. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Pixel, my tabby, stopped grooming his paw and lifted his head, eyes wide, sensing the shift in the air. I sat there, staring at those words like they were secret codes from a parallel universe. One where Ava Hart was never the family shadow. One where someone had once asked, "Are you okay?" But life isn't a movie. And that handwritten note wasn't an apology. It was a request. An invitation to the grandest performance of their lives, where I was no longer a living reminder of their failure as parents, but simply a name they needed to complete the family portrait. I could already picture them bragging to friends, "Both our daughters will be there." Even though, for 17 years, one of those daughters had been erased from every photo, every story, every memory. I felt sick, not because of the wedding, not because of Olivia, but because of how easily they pretended nothing had happened, as if the silence had been my choice. As if no one ever looked for me, checked on me, spoke my name, because that silence was something I should have understood and forgiven. But that sickness didn't turn into rage. It pulled me back to a very specific memory. That night, behind the dumpster, clutching my backpack, watching strange cars pass by, none of them seeing me. I didn't cry. I was far too used to being unseen. But when I read the words, "Family is forever," I let out a laugh, silent, just a breath pushed through the weight in my chest. Family is forever, a sweet lie. A magic phrase people use to excuse every cut they've ever made. I didn't tear the invitation. Didn't throw it in the trash. I gently placed it on the table, like laying down a piece of memory I had tried to forget but never truly lost. Then, I opened my laptop. My fingers didn't hesitate. I went to the booking site, searched for a direct flight from Portland to San Francisco. Economy class. Window seat. One checked bag, confirmed. I wasn't going to reconnect. I wasn't going for some cinematic moment where everyone bursts into tears and says they're sorry. I was going because I understood something with absolute clarity. Doors don't close themselves, you have to be the one to shut them. I was going to look them in the eye and remind myself that I was no longer that 13-year-old girl on the side of the road. I wasn't going back. I was stepping out for good. And you know the funny thing? My hands didn't shake when I booked the ticket. I didn't feel pain. Just a sharp, unmistakable sense of readiness. I was done waiting. Done fearing. I would go. But this time, I would be the one writing the story. I landed in San Francisco on a Friday afternoon, carrying a small suitcase, a pair of heels I'd never worn, and an old photo folded in my wallet for 17 years. On the drive from the airport to Napa, I sat quietly in the taxi, staring out the window at the endless stretch of vineyards, feeling a strange kind of emptiness. No nerves, no anticipation. Just a ruthless clarity. Today, I wasn't arriving as a guest. I was arriving as a crack in the glass. A memory they buried, now standing in the one place they could no longer ignore. Silverleaf Estate came into view like a page from a wedding magazine, dark wooden rooftops, golden lights strung through the trees, wine glasses gleaming on long white tables, and the sound of a string quartet echoing across the courtyard. I stepped out of the car in a vintage emerald silk dress, elegant but not flashy. My hair pinned back, earth-toned lipstick, softly lined eyes. Every detail carefully chosen. Just polished enough to keep anyone from claiming I came to cause trouble, but unmistakable enough that I wouldn't blend in. I wanted them to see me, and have nowhere to look away. When I walked into the ceremony space, the air shifted. People kept laughing, sipping, chatting, but I caught the flicker of glances. Quick, then withdrawn. I saw my mother first. She was speaking to a woman in a pale lavender dress. When her eyes landed on me, I saw the jolt ripple through her. She straightened, her wine glass trembled. Her lips parted like she was about to say something, then stopped. She didn't walk toward me. She didn't wave. She just stood there, as if staring at a ghost who had come back. My father stood not far from her. He wore a gray suit, his tie matching the color of my mother's dress. When he saw me, he frowned, tilted his head slightly as if trying to remember who I was. And in that moment, I saw what I had suspected for 17 years. They had truly never looked for me. Not because they were afraid, not because they were filled with guilt, but because they never felt the need. Then Olivia stepped out from the bridal suite. Her gown hugged her silhouette, the veil floated like mist, and the light hit her in a way that made everyone turn to look like an angel had just descended. When she saw me, she paused for a second, then offered a strained smile, her eyes trying to stay calm. "You really came?" She walked closer, her voice low but laced with unease. "Have you forgiven us?" I looked at her for a moment, then simply replied, "I came because I was invited. Not because there was an apology." Olivia froze. The smile on her lips faltered just slightly. But she didn't say anything else. Maybe she already knew this moment didn't belong to her anymore. The ceremony went on like every fairy tale wedding, soft music, sweet vows, teary-eyed parents. I sat in the last row. No one introduced me. A few guests glanced my way with curiosity, but no one asked. When Olivia and Nathaniel exchanged rings, I didn't cry. I wasn't there to feel moved. I came to remind them that what they chose to forget never truly disappeared. The dinner reception was held in a glass ballroom overlooking the vineyard. Candlelight danced off crystal glasses, silver clinked against porcelain, and the room buzzed with laughter. I chose a table near the back, quietly picking at the appetizer while watching everything unfold like an audience member waiting for their cue. My mind wasn't tense, just calmly reviewing the code before executing a program. When it came time for the speeches, the MC picked up the mic, smiling. And now, we'd like to invite someone very special to say a few words to the bride and groom, a family member who has returned after a long time. Please welcome, Ava Hart. The room froze. I stood up. The silk of my dress whispered through the air. My mother set her wineglass down too quickly, spilling a bit onto the tablecloth. My father's frown deepened, his eyes locked on mine. Olivia's eyes widened, and Nathaniel the groom remained composed, nodding slightly as if he'd expected this. I walked up to the stage, no handheld mic, just one mounted on a stand. I adjusted it slightly. The spotlight fell onto my shoulders, casting a long shadow across the white floor. From my purse, I pulled out an old piece of paper, a folded photograph. I opened it, held it up for the audience to see. This is me. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. 13 years old. Standing behind a dumpster at a gas station off the highway, over 60 miles from home. That night, I slept next to rats, the smell of garbage, and the sound of wind rushing through a torn billboard. I gently turned the photo forward, even though I knew no one could truly see it. I didn't cry that night. But the next morning, when a stranger refused to let me use his phone, because this isn't a daycare, I understood I had really been left behind. The ballroom fell completely silent. No clinking silverware, no laughter. Just the kind of stillness that feels like the surface of a lake after the wind suddenly stops. My parents abandoned me because I spilled orange juice on my sister's backpack. I glanced toward my mother. And to this day, in the wedding invitation that summoned me to this grand celebration, I still haven't heard a single apology. My mother sat frozen. My father's head hung low. Olivia didn't look at me anymore. Nathaniel, and this surprised me, kept his eyes on mine. As if he already knew. As if he had been the one to make sure my name appeared on the speakers list. I didn't come here to ruin anything. I didn't come to embarrass anyone. I came to remind everyone that there are some things you can't cover up with a fancy wedding dress or a glass of expensive wine. I came to tell the child in that photo, you weren't crazy, you weren't making it up, and you were never invisible. I placed the photo on the head table, right next to Olivia's champagne glass. I looked at her one last time. She kept her head down, lips pressed tightly together. I gave a small nod, not waiting for anyone to respond, and walked off the stage. No applause. No one stood. But I knew they all heard me, and that silence was the loudest sound in the entire room. I stepped out of the reception hall in silence, each step on the stone path peeling back layers of old memory. No one stopped me. No one called after me. The Napa evening breeze brushed against my collar, sending loose strands of hair across my cheeks. But I didn't feel cold, I felt light. Light in the way a weight that had sat on your chest for 17 years finally lifts, leaving behind not pain, but space and peace. I had nearly reached the arched gate that led to the parking lot when a hand suddenly caught my wrist from behind. I turned, startled just a little. It was Emily, my cousin, the daughter of my mom's sister. Light brown curls, a wine-colored dress, her eyes wide, but not panicked, just knowing. I always wondered, she said, catching her breath, why no one ever talked about you, like you'd never existed. But now I understand. She held my hand a little tighter, like she was trying to make up for every hug I never got from my own family. I didn't say anything, I simply nodded. No words needed, because some truths, when seen clearly, don't require explanation. A single look is enough to carry the entire story. I left Silverleaf Estate that very night. No turning back. No waiting for someone to call after me. I returned to my hotel, slipped off my heels, took out my earrings, washed the makeup from my face. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had been through the worst and was still standing. Still able to look herself in the eye without bowing her head. The next morning, my phone buzzed constantly while I sipped my first coffee of the day at a little cafe near the hotel. The first message came from an unknown number. I opened it. It was from Nathaniel. Thank you for telling the truth. I needed to know who I was marrying into, and I'm glad I learned it today, not 10 years from now, when it would have been too late to turn back. I read the message twice. Then once more. There was something calm, almost crystal clear in the tone of each word. No anger, no bitterness, just clarity, maturity. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because that thank you didn't need a response. I didn't speak up for anyone else. I spoke for myself. But having someone hear me, see me, that was something I never expected, and quietly, I was grateful for it. The second message came from Olivia. Why did you choose today? No question mark. But I knew she was demanding an answer. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a line heavy with blame, like I had ruined the fairy tale ending she was trying to write. I set my coffee down, thought for a few seconds, then typed. Because there was no other day where you would actually listen. I hit send. And that was enough. I later heard the wedding was cancelled that same day. Word spread quickly among the guests. Nathaniel didn't return to the ceremony the next morning. The Blake family withdrew all funding for the post-wedding events. Olivia moved back in with our parents a few days later, refusing to see anyone. Rumors began swirling in her friend circles, on social media, and in those family group calls I had never once been invited to. But this time, instead of being erased from the story, I was at the center of it. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel sad either. I simply watched, like someone in the back row of a theater, observing the scenes unfold chapter after chapter until the script reached the part where pretending was no longer possible. That evening, Emily messaged me. They're calling you a troublemaker, someone who can't let go, someone who should have kept quiet to save face for the family. I replied. Then let them remember I was the child they left behind, and for 17 years, I stayed silent to protect that very image. Oh. No one dared to say those words to my face. No one from the family called. My mother deleted her personal Facebook account 2 days after the wedding. My father posted an old photo of just him, Mom, and Olivia vacationing at Lake Tahoe with the caption, "Family. No matter what." I looked at it and let out a dry laugh. Once again, they chose a picture without me. As if I had never been there. As if my presence had always been something they didn't know how to explain. But what they didn't know is this. This time, they can't erase me from the story. What I said that night wasn't just for them. It was for anyone who'd ever been forced into silence to preserve a family image they themselves were never allowed to exist in. And that silence it had shattered. A few days later, I received an email from a stranger. A friend of one of the servers at Silverleaf. She'd recorded part of my speech, not the whole thing, just a clip. But it was enough to spread. Enough for others to find the blog, Patchwork Soul. Within 3 days, I received over 70 messages. Not all were long. But the phrase that repeated most often was, "Thank you. I thought I was the only one who'd ever been left behind." I knew this wasn't the end. But it wasn't the beginning either. This was the in-between, the moment I stopped running, stopped waiting for recognition. It was the moment I stood in the daylight, in reality, and let the past see me clearly. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. No nightmares. No jolting awake at 2 a.m., just steady breaths. And Pixel curled up on my chest, as if he, too, understood. I had stepped out of the darkness. Not for applause, not for a stage. Just for one honest sentence, enough to shake a story that had been built in silence. I wrote that blog post on a quiet Monday morning, with sunlight slipping through the curtains and Pixels still curled at my feet. There was nothing dramatic in the air. No burst of inspiration. Just a deep stillness, and I knew it was time to write everything down. Not to retaliate, not to shock. But so I could understand for myself how far I had come, what I had survived, and so I could pause, just once, and truly face myself. I titled the piece, "The Family That Left Me and Still Pretended to Love Me." Not to provoke, but because I knew this. Sometimes, what hurts isn't the public rejection, it's the quiet pretending that nothing ever went wrong. The performance of love. The performance of kindness. The performance of forgiveness while the one who is hurt has to stay silent, step aside, and say thank you for being invited back into the perfect picture. I began with the parts no one believes. That a 13-year-old child could be abandoned by her parents on the side of a highway for spilling orange juice. That a family could go on for 17 years as if that had never happened. I wrote about the night behind the dumpster, the payphone, the look from the man at the store who wouldn't let me use it, and my mother's eyes when I came back home. Cold, like I was some stray who had made things inconvenient. I didn't write for pity. I wrote like presenting evidence. Each paragraph a scar, each detail a stitch that never fully closed. I didn't write about the wedding. I didn't mention any names. I didn't say Olivia, or Nathaniel, or Emily. I simply told the story of a family that never looked back. A family that repainted the picture with me erased from it. And I ended the post with one single line. I don't want to return. I just wanted acknowledge that I was once there, that I was once hurt, and that I'm still moving forward. I published the piece at 10:23 a.m. No big announcement. Just a quiet post on Patchwork Soul and a soft caption on Instagram. Sometimes, the first voice you need to hear is your own. I thought the post would get a few dozen views, like all the ones before it. But I was wrong. By noon, I had over 40 emails. More than 300 shares on Instagram. By evening, I got my first phone call from a moderator of Estranged Voices, an online forum for people who've been cut off by family. I read every word and cried, she said. You put into words what I never could. 2 days later, the post appeared on a major mental health healing forum and was quoted on a podcast about intergenerational trauma. My inbox flooded like a dam had burst. I was the shadow too. My parents left me at the train station once and no one believed me. Thank you. I thought I was the only one who felt this way. I read every message. No two were the same. But they all carried the same familiar loneliness, the kind that belongs to people who've learned to survive without asking to be loved. I couldn't reply to them all. But I saved every single one. Sometimes I cried as I read, not from sadness, but because for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never known as a child. I wasn't alone. Less than a week later, I received an invitation from a university in Portland. The psychology department was hosting an internal symposium on reclaiming identity after family estrangement, and they wanted me to speak. The sender wrote, not as a victim, but as a survivor. It took me nearly 10 minutes to read that line over and over again, a survivor. I said yes. The first time I stood at that lectern, my hands trembled slightly. Not from fear of the audience, but from a lifetime of being cut off, dismissed, told I was too sensitive or making things up. But here, I didn't have to defend myself. I just had to tell the truth. And below, the room was packed, every seat filled with people quietly listening. After that, more invitations followed from community mental health groups, a local radio program, a small panel called Building a Life Without a Family Blueprint. None of them were loud. None were glamorous. But in every space, I met people like me, quiet, invisible, but resilient. A college student approached me after one of the talks and said, "You said exactly what I've always felt but could never explain. I've always felt like a hole in the world, but you made me believe that hole wasn't my fault." Every night, after each speaking event, I came home to my apartment, held Pixel in my arms, and felt like I was healing not just for myself, but for the parts of the world that had never been named. I began documenting the stories I heard anonymously, but with weight. And, slowly, an idea sparked in me. A book. Not to expose anyone, but to preserve. To remember. To remind kids like me, whether they've grown up, whether they're working, or learning how to love themselves, that their voices have a place. Once, I was left behind in the cold, in the night, at a gas station. But now, I'm handed a microphone on stage, and the whole room listens. Once, silence swallowed me whole. But now, I speak to those who were once silenced too. And my voice no longer trembles. No one can give me back my childhood. No one can erase the scars of being forgotten for so many years. But I chose a different kind of answer. I rewrote it. Not for revenge, but as proof that even when they pretended I never existed, I still lived, still breathed, still chose to show up. with every truth in my voice. And if you've watched this far, maybe you know what it feels like to be left behind. Maybe not at a gas station, but at a family dinner where no one asked how you've been. At a milestone where your chair was left empty. In a house where you had to shrink your emotions to make space for everyone else's comfort. I don't tell this story to accuse anyone. I tell it to remind you you are not wrong for hoping, and you are never weak for hurting. Some families may never change, but you have the right to change yourself. You can choose to rise, to tell the story in a way where you are no longer the victim but the survivor. The one who knows their worth not because someone finally recognized it, but because you walked through what no one else could see. Family is not a place where people get to betray you and call it love. And if no one chooses you, choose yourself. That is a beginning, not an ending.